I've been married to my husband for about a year now. He's 50, I'm 44, and together we've built a life. He's been married before and has a 26-year-old daughter, Katie, from his previous marriage. Katie's mother passed away when she was an infant due to medical complications. It was heartbreaking, and my husband raised her on his own, shouldering the responsibility without hesitation. You'd think, after all he did, she would appreciate it, right? But no! That wasn't the case. Instead of gratitude, she turned into this self-centered, entitled individual, someone people couldn't stand. It wasn't from lack of effort on his part. My husband worked tirelessly, but Katie had her grandmother, Pamela, in her corner. Pamela played a huge role in Katie's upbringing, spoiling her rotten, coddling her in every possible way. A classic overbearing grandmother. Anything Katie wanted, Pamela would give her, no matter the consequences. If anyone's to blame for Katie's entitled attitude, it's Pamela. She shaped Katie into who she became, someone who thinks the world owes her everything, someone who believes she knows it all. I tried, I really did, to get along with Katie. But it felt like she didn't even give me a chance. From the moment I was introduced to her and Pamela, it was clear they weren't fond of me. I could sense it immediately. The cold stares, the dismissive attitude, it was impossible to miss. And, of course, they never voiced their discontent directly, but it didn't take a genius to figure it out. I'm not one to care about being liked, but it's hard not to notice when people are actively disrespecting you. I stopped trying after a while. I didn't need their approval, but it would have been nice if they could at least pretend to accept me. Things never got better with Pamela either. She was always clear about her feelings. In her mind, my husband deserved someone better than me. I'm not claiming to be perfect, but honestly, anyone else who came along would probably be driven away by Katie and Pamela's toxic behavior. Even if someone better did show up, I doubt they'd have stood a chance with that kind of opposition. But my husband chose me, and we loved each other. That should have been enough for them. But no, apparently that was asking too much. A year ago, when we announced our engagement, all hell broke loose. Katie and Pamela absolutely lost it. They tried everything to break us up, but they failed. They didn't succeed, and I have no doubt they never will. When Katie showed up at our house unannounced, it was a disaster. She was beside herself, absolutely furious. She screamed at her father, accusing him of ruining their family by marrying someone like me. I was blindsided. When I asked her what she meant by someone like me, she didn't hold back. She went on about how I was a woman of loose morals, a gold digger, no less. I couldn't believe it. The audacity. I've been financially stable long before I met my husband. I'm a self-employed artist, self-taught, and I've worked hard to get where I am. I may not have a high-paying corporate job, but I make enough to support myself. For her to accuse me of using men for money was revolting. It was a low blow, and I wasn't going to stand for it. My husband saw the ugliness in her words too. That was the last straw for him. He decided to cut her off that day. He distanced himself from Pamela too, though he didn't go no contact with her because of her age. I couldn't ask him to do that to his elderly mother. But Katie? She was cut off. After that, I never spoke to Katie again. My husband still visited his mother, but I stayed away. It was obvious they didn't want me around, and I wasn't going to force myself into their lives. We didn't invite them to our wedding. Pamela had already made it clear she wouldn't come if Katie wasn't invited, so the decision was made. I was fine with it. My husband was upset for a while, but eventually, he came to terms with it. That was nearly a year ago. Then, a couple of months after our wedding, we heard the shocking news: Katie had gotten married in secret. She and her boyfriend from college had tied the knot in a private ceremony, with just a few friends in attendance. We weren't invited. My husband took it hard. That was his only daughter, and she'd married without him. She didn't even try to reach out to him. That was what really hurt him. I could see how broken he was over it. Had I been in his shoes, I would have felt the same way. But even after that, he tried. He reached out to her to congratulate her. He sent her a message, but she never responded. She had already moved on with her life, and we only heard about her through other people. Apparently, she and her husband had bought a house together. As much as my husband tried to respect her space, the pain of being shut out never fully left him. He decided to maintain his distance. And had Katie reached out to us, I would have been open to forgiving her. But she didn't. She just kept her distance. Then, about a week ago, I got a call from Pamela. The news was stunning. Katie and her husband were getting a divorce. They'd only been married for a year. Apparently, the divorce had been in the works for a few months, and now that the waiting period was over, it was finalized. Katie had lost the house, and honestly, it seemed fair. She was the one who had cheated on her husband. She didn't think emotional cheating counted, though. She said that, because she never acted on her feelings, it shouldn't have been a problem. But that was her defense, and it was infuriating. How could she be so naive, so reckless? She ruined her own marriage. But that wasn't the only issue. The worst part? She had nowhere to go now. The house, once her home, had been overtaken by chaos, and with it, all of her finances crumbled. Katie had never been good with money, a free spirit who saw no need to save or budget. Her lavish lifestyle, fueled by a lack of financial discipline, had led her to a point of no return. The divorce had only added fuel to the fire, leaving her with little to her name. Her request was simple. She couldn't afford rent for the next couple of months and needed a place to stay to sort herself out. It wasn't exactly a surprise. She had always been reckless, and now, with nothing left, she turned to us for help. A few weeks earlier, when Pamela called to inform me of Katie's sudden divorce, it was a shock. No one had known about it, and now, after moving out of her ex-husband's house, Katie had been living with Pamela for a few days. The distance from Pamela's to her workplace was taking a toll, both physically and mentally, and that's when Katie began to rethink everything. She wanted to fix her fractured relationship with us, desperate to move closer, to try and make things right. That day at Pamela's house, as Katie spoke, something shifted. Her eyes, once filled with arrogance, now seemed more vulnerable. She admitted it, she had an ego problem, a deep one. The truth? She had never learned to be independent, to stand on her own. Pamela and my husband had always been there, making sure Katie's every need was met, creating an atmosphere of luxury and expectation. But now, life had shown her the truth. The world doesn't bend over backward for you, not unless you earn it. Her realization hit hard. She hadn't just lost her husband, she had lost the safety net she had relied on for so long. Yet, even in the face of it all, she didn't want to lose her family too. That's why she came to us, pleading for one chance to make things right. We were caught off guard. How could we possibly move on from all that had transpired? I needed time to think. Her words echoed in my head, but what troubled me most was the realization that she still seemed to want something from us, something beyond just forgiveness. She needed us to help her get back on her feet, yet the apology felt more like an afterthought, an obligatory act rather than a heartfelt plea. After some heated discussion, we agreed to take time to consider everything carefully before making any decisions. We'd allow her to continue working from home for now while she sorted out her next steps. My husband and I were uncertain, walking on a tightrope. This wasn't just about opening our doors to her, it was about whether or not we could trust her again. We had to rebuild something before letting her move in. We weren't sure if we were ready to let that happen. In the weeks that followed, Katie did her best to prove she had changed. Her attempts were subtle at first, but after a while, I began to see a shift. She was kinder, more considerate. It made me wonder if maybe, just maybe, she had grown up. But when she asked again, after a couple of weeks, if I was ready to let her move in, I knew the time had come to decide. After talking it over with my husband, we agreed. He had been waiting for me to come around, and when I did, he was relieved. Katie, on the other hand, was ecstatic. She called immediately, insisting that I wouldn't regret this. The next day, she arrived, bags packed, ready to start fresh. My husband and I took the day off to welcome her, to make sure she felt comfortable. But as soon as she stepped through the door, she handed us a stack of papers. We were confused. Legal paperwork? For what? We hadn't expected any formal agreements for such an informal arrangement. But as we skimmed through the documents, a cold wave of realization swept over us. She wanted a 50% claim on our home. Our home! The one my husband and I had worked so hard for, the house we bought with our own money 2 years ago. Katie had no part in it, no contribution whatsoever. How could she even think we'd agree to such an outrageous request? I returned the papers, stunned, asking her to explain herself. She didn't seem embarrassed or remorseful. No, she casually explained that her lawyer had drawn up the papers to ensure she couldn't be kicked out like she had been by her ex-husband. The words hit me like a slap across the face. I was speechless. My husband took over, trying to defuse the situation. He told her that legal paperwork wasn't necessary. This wasn't supposed to be permanent, after all. But Katie didn't back down. She had the audacity to say that while she trusted my husband, she wasn't sure about me. She needed it in writing. She wouldn't move in unless we signed the documents. The nerve! In that moment, I made a decision. I calmly told her that if she didn't trust me enough to live under the same roof, she could find another place to stay. Maybe Pamela would take her back. After all, she had been staying there for weeks already. I was done. As I spoke, I could feel the anger rising inside me, but I kept it together. I was firm, unapologetic. I slammed the door in her face. My husband stood silently, not saying a word. He knew. He knew she had crossed the line, and there was no coming back from this. Outside, Katie screamed, cried, begging us to reconsider. But it didn't matter. I didn't care anymore. My blood boiled, but I kept my composure, refusing to let her manipulate me. After she stormed off, the house fell into silence. We thought it was over, but the storm was just beginning. The very next day, Pamela called, her voice sharp with fury. She screamed at my husband, blaming us for insulting Katie, demanding we apologize and let her back in. The argument raged on for an hour before my husband gave up and cut the call. But Pamela didn't stop there. She enlisted her family to do her bidding, reaching out to us from every direction. Every single one of them, with their dramatic, over-the-top comments, insisted that I had overreacted. Katie was just a child, they said, traumatized from the breakup and struggling to trust again. They wanted us to accommodate her, to understand that she needed time to heal. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She wasn't a child, she was 26 years old. And let's not forget why she had been kicked out of her ex-husband's house in the first place. Cheating. That's the reason. And now, we were supposed to be the ones to apologize. The harassment didn't stop. My phone buzzed nonstop with messages, all telling me I was in the wrong. But I had reached my breaking point. I couldn't continue to let them manipulate me. So, my husband and I made a decision. We blocked everyone, every single one of them. It was a mass blocking, sure, but we were done. No one would guilt us into becoming the villains in this twisted drama. We had taken a stand, and now, we'd have peace. Pamela and Katie may be furious, but we wouldn't know. They couldn't contact us anymore. And honestly, I didn't care. What mattered was that we had stood up for ourselves. That, at least, felt right. It had reached a breaking point, a level of chaos that even he could no longer endure. Despite being her father, he admitted to me, with a heavy heart, how guilty he felt for treating her this way. After all, she was his only child. But I reassured him. If you give in to every single one of her demands, you'll be no better than Pamela, I said. You're actually doing her a favor by teaching her boundaries. By helping her grow into a better person. I had no children of my own, but in that moment, I imagined what it would be like. If I had children, I would want them to have a father like mine. He deserved to be proud of his choices, not burdened by guilt. That seemed to settle his mind a little. And we both hoped, maybe even prayed, that Katie would catch on and take the hint. That she'd finally start to change, to become a better person. Then, the unexpected happened. Katie came over to visit. Thankfully, I wasn't home at the time. I was stuck at the studio, working late, and by the time I got back, they were already on their way out. As I pulled into the driveway, I saw Katie and Pamela, both getting into their car, their faces painted with anger and frustration. Something had clearly gone wrong. It wasn't until they drove off that I stepped out of my car and made my way inside. My husband sat on the couch, looking as if he had just come out of a storm. He was flushed, red in the face, a clear sign he'd been yelling. I knew instantly what had happened. The storm had been stirred up by his mother and daughter. I asked him what was going on. His answer came fast, his voice still sharp with irritation. They had come over, under the guise of making amends, of fixing things with us. Apparently, they had contacted him from a different number while he was at work, telling him they were outside our house, waiting to talk. He rushed home, hoping for an apology, since that's exactly what they promised over the phone. But the moment they stepped inside, everything went sideways. Katie, acting like she was the magnanimous one, started by telling him she was ready to forgive him. But there was a catch. She couldn't stand the sight of me anymore. I've put up with her for long enough, she said. Now, she's overstepping. She has no right to be here. She's not my real mother. Then, with her usual audacity, she demanded that my husband talk to me, scold me for insulting her the other day, and make me apologize. My husband, never one to back down, told her I had every right to react the way I did. But that was like throwing gasoline on a fire. Katie, eyes wide with fury, accused him of being a coward. You're only taking her side because you're too scared to stand up to her, she shouted. I'm ashamed to have a father like you, one who can't even stand up for his own flesh and blood. The tension between them snapped, escalating into a full-blown argument. My husband, already on edge, fired back, telling her that she was the one in the wrong here. She didn't need anyone to defend her. And besides, she had Pamela on her side already. No matter what she did, no matter how wrong it was, Pamela would always be there, ready to back her up. But then, the real bombshell dropped. My husband looked her in the eye, his voice cold, and said, I'm more ashamed of having a daughter like you than you are of having a father like me. It was a moment that cut through the tension like a knife. At that point, both Pamela and Katie burst into tears, but not in the way they expected. They tried to manipulate him, blaming me for turning him against them, for poisoning his mind and making him believe they were terrible people. The tears didn't have the effect they were hoping for, though. My husband had seen this all before. He was immune to their manipulation. He didn't flinch, didn't soften. He just stared them down, his silence louder than words. They kept crying, hoping that maybe he would cave, maybe apologize. But he didn't. He just let them cry, unbothered. For almost 15 minutes, they sobbed, but still, no response from him. Finally, Katie, seething with anger, called him heartless. I can't believe you're going to let us cry and not even try to make us feel better, she hissed. But my husband, his patience exhausted, replied, I know exactly what you're doing. These tactics aren't going to work on me. Katie wasn't having it. This isn't a tactic, she spat. I'm genuinely upset. You, as a father, refuse to take responsibility for your actions and make things right with me. Then, with a final jab, she played the mother card. My mom would be ashamed of you, she said, twisting the knife. That, finally, was the breaking point. My husband unleashed everything he had been holding in for years. If your mother knew what kind of person you had become, she'd probably stay buried underground. No one would want a daughter like you, he said, each word sharp as a dagger. I won't lie, it was harsh. But after everything they had put him through, I was surprised it hadn't happened sooner. I had my own patience, but even I would have cracked before him. He had kept it together for so long, trying to be the good father, the good husband, but they pushed him to the edge. And today, the dam finally broke. Just before I got home, he had been yelling at Pamela, blaming her for turning Katie into the awful person she had become. Now you've made her into exactly what you wanted, he said. You can take full responsibility for her now. They left shortly after that, defeated, but my husband, finally free from the tension, felt a sense of relief. I calmed him down after they were gone, and together, we opened our finest bottle of wine. It was a small celebration, but it felt like the right thing to do. He had finally said everything he needed to say, and for the first time in a long while, I knew that he wouldn't have to deal with that drama again for a long time. And that, I thought, was worth celebrating. It's been almost a year since I last posted here, and I can't believe how much my life has changed. I hadn't thought about this account for a while, but a few days ago, it popped into my mind. I had forgotten the login details, but after some digging, I finally managed to get in today. So, here's the update. Katie is still living with Pamela, and thankfully, they've stayed far away from us since that explosive fallout with my husband. They haven't tried to contact us at all, and I am honestly so grateful for that. Life with my husband has been quiet in the months since. We finally decided to adopt a dog. Kids were never on our radar. Truth be told, I've never been interested in having children, and with my age, I don't think it's safe for me to carry a pregnancy. We did think about fostering, but neither of us was really emotionally or mentally prepared for that. A dog, though? That seemed perfect. We rescued a 3-year-old golden retriever from the shelter, and we named him Bob just because we thought it was a funny name. It's been amazing. He's brought so much joy into our lives, and we're so grateful that he chose us as his parents. The funniest part? A friend of mine told me that Katie had tweeted something about being replaced. At first, we couldn't prove it, but it didn't take much to figure out that she was probably talking about Bob. Can you imagine? Jealous of a dog? I laughed when I first heard about it, but then I started to feel a little sad for her. My husband, as much as he loves his daughter, probably would have forgiven her if she had just apologized. But she didn't. And Pamela didn't force her to. It's clear now that Katie's pride is stronger than any chance of reconciliation. But my husband and I are happy. We spend our days with Bob, and life is peaceful. And I wouldn't trade it for anything.